hang on and it'll start recording in a second. Okay, there it goes. Well, Ed, I'm glad to meet you. I'm glad to see that you've been listening to the videos and getting something out of them. Um, you mentioned something that gave me the idea that I should start this way with you. That basically Buddhism has come to the West broken. It's broken and has fractures in several places. And that would say that one of the most important one is translation errors.
Yeah.
That the people who originally did the translations were British. In fact, they were scholars, and they became interested in the Indian languages. And so they start off translating the Pali without an understanding of Buddhism and without an understanding of the Pali language. And so they were, having a hard go of it right from the get-go. And so eventually over, about 40 years, they developed a lexicon. Now, a lexicon is a translation dictionary from English to Pali. And that the lexicons now that the translators use, all the modern translators use the lexicons that these Christians did, which means that a lot of the words that are translated originally, that remains a translation.
Yeah, I mean, like for me, it was new that you used the word attitude. Like for me, it was new, and it changed a lot. Just that word for me, because in Swedish, attitude is a very different word from the word that is used normally, which is what is the word that they normally use?
Well, the Pali word is sama sankappa.
Yeah.
Okay, and the word can be translated in many ways.
Yeah.
And that the way that I see it most commonly translated is right intention and right thought.
Exactly.
Okay, now right thought has a bit of usefulness to it, because if in fact you have right thought, then you will have eventually right intention.
Eventually. Hopefully.
Eventually, right. But that's also problematic because right thought is generally not practiced. But we do it a lot with Anapanasati, that in fact changing the content of the mind is the major part of our practice, as opposed to watching or noting what's in the mind is what's more common in Buddhist practices because of the Western influence. And I think that this is part of the problem is that because they don't understand that this is a whole attitude change, a whole view, world view. Now the other word, right intention, is even more problematic. And
That's
the reason
the
for
most
it
common
is
in Swedish. In Swedish is right intention. That's the word they use,
right.
and I never heard any other word.
Right. Okay. Well, here's the problem with using the word intention is that intention has always that you want something. You want something and you're intending for it. And so it also has to do with the future, and it also has to do with not being good enough. So I intend to have right thought instead of just having right thought.
Yeah, it's both. It's both in the future, and it's full of doubt also.
Yes, it does have doubt built into it. That in fact,
That's why it doesn't work.
the eradication of doubt and dealing with our ignorance is a major aspect of the Buddha's path, and it's built in many different levels. So we can then say that this is just one example, Sama Sankappa, that is translated wrong. And we begin to see that there's a whole lot of words that are translated wrong, and that they're translated out of Pali into a kind of Christianese. Look at the words that have crept in that we have from Christianity: monk, nun, monastery,
Monastery.
temple, uh, uh, canon,
Yeah.
scriptures, prayer, meditation, concentration.
Concentration is a big one, yes.
Right, and it just goes
I
on.
heard that you said in a video, and it really impacted me also. You said that concentration is not the right word. It's more a collection. You have to collect the mind,
Right,
you know,
the
together.
gathering together of the
Gathering.
factors that we need. Yeah. An easy example of that is a big wall clock. You've got a clock, okay?
Yeah.
You can when if you have that clock samadhi, that means that all the pieces of the clock are sitting together and functioning correctly so that it becomes a clock. Concentrating a clock means you take a sledgehammer to it and you beat it into a small package.
Yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
now which is a better clock? Something that's been beat to death or something that's properly functioning?
You know, I've been trying to beat that clock, you know, very much. It's not working.
Yes, so people who try to do concentration meditations, um, they're narrowing their focus. An example of that would be, uh, you see, we do want to focus the mind and be able to get it to apply and sustain and keep going. The basic point that I was thinking about would be like reading, because everybody does a lot of reading. And we read online. We read an article online. We get an email, and it's a long email, and we read it starting at the beginning, and we keep reading it. And in a way, we're concentrating on it, but more importantly, we're focused on it. If we get too concentrated on that email, then we may not even be able to get through it because we get stuck on one of the paragraphs. Okay. We're not looking for one pointed concentration, we're looking for a flow.
Is it an uninterrupted flow we're working with?
Well, I wouldn't call it uninterrupted because that's not the way that it's practiced.
It's impossible.
It's impossible. That's exactly right, especially for the untrained and unskilled mind. And when the mind becomes skilled and trained correctly, and the individual knows his mind very well, then he stops trying to do that.
Yeah.
Okay, that's something that's.
I'm just gonna try. I'm just gonna try. This is like the first time I have a video call, so I'm just gonna try to put my iPad here on the right place because I'm holding it up with my arms, you know. So let me see. Can you see my face now?
No, it's still cut off. Maybe you can tilt it a little more.
Let me see.
No, that's yes,
that's better.
Right, but you have to lean down to get it. It would be better.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. Is this better?
Yes, but you're working very hard. You're trying to get really close and all of that. It would be good if you could relax and just adjust the camera so that it had better top of your head. You know, you tilt the camera so that it'll get.
Yeah, I try, but then it falls down. This iPad.
Then it falls down. Okay, yeah, all right. You can get a stand. You can work with it later. Okay.
It's better?
No, still cutting your eyes off.
Okay. I do like this. I hold it. I hold it. Okay. It's better. Sorry.
All right. That'll do. That'll do. So, we had talked about the fact that many of the words are translated incorrectly, and because of that, Buddhism gets a kind of a religious flavor. I mean, look at all the religious words that are used. And because of the religious language that it's in, many people get the idea that the goal is a kind of religious goal. And because we have the idea that Jesus is way up there in the sky and God is really high and far away and very good and we're not, and original sin and all that kind of stuff, we tend to do that with the Buddha also.
Yeah.
Rather than seeing him as a really, really beautiful neighbor, we try to make him something really super special.
Yeah, I tried to really put him down. I tried to, like, he's just a normal human being. Please, Edward, please try to relate to this figure. But every time I listen to other teachers, it was like, and all this talk about enlightenment as a like a psychedelic experience, you know, like it's a big experience, you know, that's gonna
Hmm.
change your life, and after you have it, then you're like perfect, and you can just do anything. Everything you touch turns into gold, you know. Sometimes I get that feeling
Well,
that people talk about that.
there are, let us say, experiences that really, really affect someone very powerfully. But normally, those experiences are in the opposite direction. An example of that is someone, let us say, who burns their hand very badly on the stove. And because of that, they don't want to go around fire anymore. Every time that they go around fire, they remember that very bad burn, and so they want to avoid getting burned again. Okay? Now, that fire that we're talking about could be, in fact, a kind of criticism that a child can, let us say, go on stage and forget his lines and get criticized, and maybe an aunt or an uncle or a grandparent fusses and argues and screams at him for forgetting his lines while he's on stage, and that kid does not want to go back on stage ever again.
Exactly.
Okay, he will avoid it because of one big episode.
Mm.
Okay, but like I said, that's generally in the opposite direction of where we're going.
Mm.
Generally what happens instead is that our really good experiences, we tend to forget about them because they were, after all, safe and kind of ordinary.
Yeah.
And that when students are using meditation to try to gain an experience, that means that they're wanting something that they don't have.
Yeah. It's a
And
grasp.
so that's actually a form of suffering.
Yeah.
Actually, we're not looking for meditation or anything like that that has, let us say, experience as a milestone. That a much better method of looking at it is basically over time the eradication of doubt
Mm.
about how the practice is to be done.
Mm. I noticed I tried what I have really, you know, tried your method these last few days, and I was like, Edward, you have to really, now you have to do this, Edward. You have to really remind yourself every 5 minutes to remember and do the Anapanasati. And you know, since I have my 9-month-old son, I never know when I'm going to be able to meditate. So I meditate when he sleeps, you know. So last time I did it, it was the first time I didn't want to come out of the meditation. I just wanted to sit and just continue, you know. It was the
Okay.
first time. So it was just, yeah, I just continued and I continued and I continued. And then I heard him screaming from his room that he wake up, my son. And I was like, oh, nice. And then I look at the clock, 1 hour and 10 minutes. It was not effortless. It was not full of effort, anything. It was very nice.
Well, you see that when people want an experience and they want something, they're going to do something to get that experience, which
Yeah.
means that they're going to put in effort for it. Generally, that kind of effort is not the right effort.
No.
Because of that, the mind will get tired because it's working too hard. Because it gets tired and working too hard, it gets dull. When the mind is dull, the student is not quite looking at what's going on, and so they go into what they call deep meditation. Now, that deep meditation is generally when the mind is just really tired.
Yeah. It happens, you know. I get really brain tired because I think, you know, I told you that I have some compulsive thoughts, and I think or compulsive thought patterns, I would say. So I think a lot, you know, and it just keeps going and going, and it's a
Do
lot
you
of
know anyone who does not do that?
well, it's just, here in Sweden, people seem to not be doing that because everyone I talk to, they're like, I'm thinking all these thoughts all the time, and I use the meditation and Buddhism to stop it, and people are like, "What? I'm not thinking all the time." You know, they're not saying that, but they're like, they're reacting like it's a really weird thing to try to get a hold of that. But for me, I mean, I notice every time I think. Also, I have a natural strong sati, I think. So I notice small pictures. You know, it can be a micro thought, like my neighbor. My neighbor made a sound, and I had a micro thought, like it was very fast, that somebody was coming into the apartment, and then and my body reacted like with adrenaline. And normally I would miss it but I was doing Anapanasati. So I was like, my brain was recording everything. So I was like, okay, so this is like the micro impulse, micro thought that maybe in another setting it would be like, oh, I'm gonna get a little bit worried, and then like a few days later I'm gonna think about buying a house alarm, and I don't know where that impulse coming from, and it was not logical. It was just a sound from my neighbor. So my brain is reacting like a ape, you know, like a animal. So uh,
Most of a human brain is, in fact, the brain of an animal.
yeah, and
In fact,
that's,
all of the
yeah,
stuff that keeps us alive, all of our instinctual behavior, uses the part of the brain that looks the same as the alligator.
yeah,
Anything that an alligator can do, you do with that part of your brain.
yeah,
Now, the scientists even call it the reptilian brain because it looks like the brain of a reptile.
yeah,
And it's got a hippocampus and an amygdala and a smaller cerebellum. The human cerebellum is huge, but
yeah,
other than that, so anything that an alligator can do, like swim and walk around and wag its tail and eat and see and hear and all of that kind of stuff, that's what the alligator does. But the
yeah.
alligator is almost always on guard because an alligator's life is dangerous. It's dangerous when he's still in the shell because some other alligator may eat the eggs.
Yeah.
And it's dangerous because I have actually gotten photos of birds, big
Hmm.
crane kind of birds. Will take a relatively growing alligator, maybe a foot, 18 inches
Oh,
long, and the bird will eat that alligator.
oh,
So
that's a good
is,
lunch.
huh?
That's a good lunch.
Life is tough for an alligator.
Oh,
And
that's.
so that's where that instinctual self-preservation
Mm.
comes from. That we generally are on guard for danger
Yeah, and
because we started off in
yeah,
great danger. But
yeah,
now human existence, human society is not necessarily dangerous.
no,
If you go off into the woods without any camping gear, without any clothing, without any shoes, without any tent or any camping equipment, it's really dangerous out there.
yeah,
And yet nowadays you can go camping and you can carry a backpack that's got knife and lights and good heavy clothing and mosquito repellent and all of that kind of
yeah.
stuff. And you can go out into the wilderness and have a ball.
Mm.
So you can see that that's basically what's happened is humans have uh, been able to make their environment safe, and yet they still don't feel safe.
Exactly. And that realization for me was like uh, that I got this impulse, this very quick picture of a man coming inside of my apartment. It was just it was a quarter of a second, you know. But
Hmm.
if I had missed it, I would have not have known why I felt a little bit uneasy afterwards, because it was just
Okay.
very quick. But
Well,
yeah,
you're right. That's and I'm really glad that you're picking that up. That's something that many students are slow to. The Buddha said, in fact, that the mind is fast, O
Yeah,
monks. The mind is so fast that he doesn't even have an analogy for how fast the mind is.
it's incredibly
Your
fast.
mind can go to Saturn and back just by thinking of the rings, and then you can go to Jupiter, and then you can go to Mars and come back. And light doesn't travel that fast. It'll take 90 minutes for the light from Saturn to get to us, but you can go to Saturn in the mind just by
Yeah,
instantly. Okay, where did that come from? It came from the development over evolution of the survival of the fittest. In the indication is the victim who can respond to danger faster will will survive, and the
yeah.
slow one doesn't. There's even a movie that's the name of the movie is The Quick and the Dead.
Mm.
You're
Okay.
either you're either quick or you're dead.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
what danger. And so we've got that internal mechanism, and without it, we wouldn't have survived. So we've got to have very, very fast reaction time.
Yeah.
Okay,
And,
that
and,
if
and, and mm.
if another alligator comes swimming up close to me as an alligator, I better know it very quickly.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
better be on alert if there's an
Yeah.
alligator swimming next door to me. Okay, so this is the whole idea that things happen really, really fast, and the very quickness of the reptilian brain is because it's going to be doing minimal amount of actual processing,
Mm.
that the human part of the brain is slow compared to the reptilian part of the brain.
Yeah.
Okay,
It
so we
presented
can
a, it
react.
presented the final product in like quarter of a second.
Right.
Yeah.
Actually, the general idea is that things happen on a internal clock inside the mind that operates at about a tenth of a second, so
Okay.
that you'll have about 10 mind moments in 1 second.
That's fast.
Well, here's the way that we know this for sure, and that is then in 1910, when films started to come into production in movie houses and whatnot, they
Mm-hmm.
ran it at 10 frames a second. The
Ah.
10 frames a second of the videos flickered, and people could tell that things were going on and off and on and off and on and off. So they increased the frame rate in the 1920s up to 24 frames a second. Now that means that it's going to cost more than twice as much to make a movie, because the most important and most expensive part of the movies back then was the film that they had to
Yeah, the
use.
big films. Yes.
Okay, and at
Mm.
24 frames a second, that's too fast for the eye to catch and process to know that this is flickering.
Mm.
Okay,
Okay, amazing.
and so we actually called them flicks.
Yeah,
The
flicks. Yeah.
movie, we'd go to the flick. Okay,
Yeah.
what does that mean? It means that it's flickering, but now movies don't flick. That's
No.
because they've got the rate up to 30 frames a second, and sometimes even 60 frames a second. And because of that, there's no problem. But that just indicates that, yeah, that's how fast things actually happen inside the
Yeah.
brain. So what that means is that you might have heard the story that a lie can travel around the world in the time that it takes for the truth to put his pants on. Have you ever
Yeah.
heard that?
No,
Okay.
I have not. It was a nice expression.
All right. Well, this is what it means actually, is not that it's the truth and versus a lie, but it's mostly that there's an initial reaction time. And then we can process it to make sure that it's almost like in an airplane, you have an automatic pilot. Now, an automatic pilot is not nearly as sophisticated as an actual pilot.
No, exactly.
Okay, it's got a gyroscope. It's actually quite simple, the autopilot. But what it does is it'll keep the plane going in the same direction at about the same altitude without any problems with pitch and yaw or
Yeah.
any of that kind of stuff. Okay, but if you take the airplane off of automatic pilot, now the captain has a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
He's got to fly that plane, and he's got to keep it out of danger. You see, that's the problem with the automatic pilot.
Mm.
Is the automatic pilot is missing a lot of information. It, for instance, doesn't know that there's birds in the sky.
Yeah. It sounds like a lot like my first 20 years of my life.
Hmm.
Mm.
Right. So we actually start then in automatic pilot
Yeah.
that is quick reacting, is a fast reaction, but is almost always based in preservation of the self,
Yeah.
and in that regard, uh, it's, let us say, very sloppy.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of comparable thought. I notice also it makes a lot of comparisons between me and other people all the time, and it comes with a
Well,
little
we're
bit.
looking for danger.
Yeah, yeah, it's weird.
We're looking for something wrong. We're looking to
Yeah,
avoid because it's based upon self-preservation.
yeah, and these are
Okay.
also like little thoughts that I wouldn't notice if I didn't have sati. It's like it's little daydreams about, and I'm like, what is this daydream about? And then when I investigate it, it's mostly about social status,
Hmm.
and like what those other people think about me. And
Yes,
yeah,
exactly. Do I fit in with the herd?
yeah,
Okay, this is also instinctual because in the old days, if we didn't fit into the herd, if the predator could call us out, our individual self out of the herd, then we're dinner.
yeah,
But if we can get into the middle of the herd, like if we're a bunch of wildebeest or zebras or uh, ox or something like that, they get into a herd. Sheep get into a herd.
yeah,
And so sheepdogs can actually manage that herd, and all they're doing is just barking, and
yeah,
everything else is instinctual
yeah.
because of the sheep.
Yeah, they're like
That,
friends actually. Also, the sheepdog and the sheep when they're not running around.
right, exactly. When
Yeah,
when the dog is off duty,
yeah, exactly. It's
then
very
there's
cool.
no problem. But when the dog is actually out there barking at the sheep, they will go this way and that way, and the
Yeah, yeah,
dog is
yeah.
smart enough, and they can get them go into from pasture
It's
to
very
pasture
funny.
through this gate. Hmm.
And then they take a break, lick little
That's
bit
be-
sheep and everything.
that's because the sheep themselves are operating off of instinct.
Mm.
So when the people, human beings, try to fit in with society or whatever, that's the same instinct. It's the herding instinct.
Mm.
If we don't fit in, we're dinner.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's literally life and death situation.
And we take everything as life and death because
Yeah,
that's the whole point about the issue of the survival,
yeah,
that everything becomes an issue of survival when we have the attitude of being a victim. In other words, when we have the attitude that things are dangerous, then that means that we're more likely to be operating out of reptilian instinctual
yeah,
behavior. But when we have the attitude that everything is safe and everything is hunky dory, then we don't have to react. Now we can think things through, process things better, and have a better solution to the situation.
yeah. It's like I noticed that the people with dementia, when I come to them, to their houses and help them with different stuff, I noticed that if I don't come in with the right energy, I can speak, I can say like hello and be very nice, but if I don't have the right safe, energy, then they will start reacting to it like
Hmm.
in different ways.
Well, you can see that, in fact, dementia or Alzheimer's would
Mm.
be then a human who has lost much of what was their human brain capacity. That it's the frontal lobe that rots out. That, in fact, if it was the reptilian brain that was malfunctioning, they die.
Yeah,
You'd either have a heart attack or just keel over or something like that. But in fact, no, Alzheimer's is, or it's gone through a succession in the English language, and the word that you're using is dementia, but that's 100 years ago.
Okay, okay,
For,
okay.
for a long time, they used the word senility or senile.
Senile, yeah, senile, yeah,
Okay.
like the senile,
And
yeah, yeah,
now they're using the word Alzheimer's. And
yeah.
so a lot of people get confused. What's the difference between senile and Alzheimer's?
Mm.
The answer to that is it's the doctor who made the diagnosis who's the main
Exactly, exactly.
difference.
Dr. Alzheimer, yeah.
Right. So that whole idea of senility means that we can't even function hardly as a human being, and the outcome is either totally into the vegetable state or death.
Yeah.
Uh, but as you're indicating, when someone is senile, then they're not listening to your words. They're picking up your energy because
Yeah,
that's the only kind of brain they've got left.
yeah. They're very susceptible to it.
Mm-hmm.
And but also it's very nice because if you take care of them very good, then they would show different sides. I had this old man, very aggressive towards the other staff, and I was working a lot with my energy when I come to his house, and during Christmas now, and the COVID and everything, I put everything protective gear on. He can't see my face, anything, but I help him a lot, and we had fun time. And then he said, "You just come back to this place during Christmas, and maybe there's a gift for you under the tree," he said. Like he was saying it to his child. You know,
Uh-huh.
I could see he was put back in time, and was like, and he was projecting maybe his child or something on me. This guy in like almost a hazmat suit, standing in his house.
You're pointing at something very, very important. That it's actually quite well known that all elderly people begin to revert back to childhood the older they get, and part of that has to do with the deterioration of the brain in the sense of what's happening and processing in the moment. And so they revert back to the old things. But there's something else underlying that that's important for especially Dhamma dudes and people who are meditating to understand that elderly people want to get back to the childhood because they recognize in a way that their whole adult life has been shit.
Oh, okay, that's pretty rough.
Hmm. And so I've been around Alzheimer's, and they tend to remember things that happened when they were very young.
Mm.
Um,
But I
so
noticed that I'm sorry, Dhammarato, but I noticed that in the dying as well. Both when my parents both are unfortunately passed, and I was with the bedside of my mother 3 years ago,
mhm.
and I noticed also that people also start to revert in some ways in behavior when that happens, and also like when my father died, I noticed he was very he went into a state of total fear, and total uh, he reverted back into you couldn't have contact with him, you
Hmm.
know. But my mother, she was a Christian. She had much more coping mechanisms for it. She was more spiritual, she was very calm, but at the same time she was at the whole, if you look at the whole thing, she come back, she was also like traveling back in time a little bit in her behavior, because
Hmm.
there was a man there was a nurse there who was Spanish, because my mother is from Uruguay, so he come and he speaks Spanish to my mother, and you could see that she was like even though she had a lot of pain, she was like, she was coming like a little girl, she was a little bit giggly, because he was speaking this Spanish to her, and it was nice to see.
Okay, well let's investigate for that for a little bit. When a when a baby is born, the brand new baby, um, the situation is like in a medical ward, maternity ward, that when the baby is born, the women in the maternity ward, the workers, they like to be there when the child is given to the mother. That's a very tender moment for the mother to bond with her new baby. They've done some research and found out that there's actually some brain chemicals that are going on with that bonding.
Mm.
Oxycontin or oxycodone, something like that, is the name of the chemical that is naturally produced in the brain, and that the mother keeps that for her child throughout her life. But it's the strongest when the child is infant. When the child actually needs to be taken care of, the mother will have that affinity, that bonding, that nurturing quality to it. And so the brand new infant is forgiven for everything that it does wrong.
Yeah.
But it's okay, whatever the child does. Okay, if it's crying, we try to burp it.
Yeah.
If that child is crying when he's 8 or 9 years old, the adults will tell him to shut up. We
Yeah.
can't
No.
tell
No.
a
I
brand
no.
new
I won't do that. But yeah. I understand what you mean.
right, but a brand new
I
infant,
I
you
cry a lot. I cry maybe 3-4 times a week. I'm a real big crier still.
right. So even when the child, that brand new infant, has his first bowel movement, his first
Yeah. Exactly.
poopy, everybody is very happy about it.
Yeah.
But if that
Exactly.
same child is a teenager, craps on the dinner table, everybody's going to be really unhappy and angry at him. Okay, now here's where we're going with this: is that when every one of us is new and freshly born, the general thing that happens, and it doesn't always happen. If it doesn't happen, then this is what they call an abandonment issue, because the infant feels abandoned. He's not getting the nurturing that he needs.
Yeah.
That Freud began to figure this out 130 years ago. So basically what happens is that as we get older, the older the infant gets, the more into society he gets. Like by the time he gets 6 years old, he's got to go to school.
Yeah.
Okay. With him having to go to school and having to do something and perform, this is where criticism comes in. And so now the mother is not just goo goo gaga with her child. Now she is go clean your room,
Mm.
eat your food. You have to eat your peas before you get your dessert. Learn your
Yeah.
ABCs. Okay. And so everything happens to the child that turns our wonderful life into a job to be done.
Yeah.
And so the basic change is made from being nurturing, the mother nurturing her baby, into her being critical of her child.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay, so we go from nurturing to critical, and mothers will go back and forth. In fact, the mothers will be the one who will most likely be nurturing,
Mm.
but she'll most of the time be critical. So she'll be critical and nurturing. Dad's even more likely to be critical and a little bit of nurturing.
Mm.
But other people, other adults are critical all the time and very little nurturing. And so
Yeah.
as we grow up, we don't get much nurturing. So when we're old people, the ones who are having Alzheimer's, they're trying to revert back to that
Yeah. To
time
that state.
when, and not only
Everything
that,
was good.
because they can't take of themselves very well because of their brain illness, they are actually are taken care of. They do, in a way, revert back to their infant
Yeah.
status.
We're not very nurturing culture now. When I walk around in the streets, I think bad things about people. I see one guy is, I think, okay, the fatty. Oh, that's I just put my labels on everybody. You know. So I see one of, oh, that's a fat person, or that's a lazy person, or look at his shoes, and it's just going and going, and it's sometimes I use it as humor, dark, very dark humor, but I notice it puts me down as well.
That's exactly right. That's in fact, the important thing. Of all the time that you recognize that you're critical of other people, guess what? You're even more critical more often of yourself.
Yeah, it's not a nice
Okay.
feeling.
hmm And so, what the whole point of Anapanasati is, the whole teaching of the Buddha, is let's come out of that critical thinking and come back into nurturing thoughts. Okay. Now, there's something else that's going on that's actually quite valuable for students, modern students, to understand. And that is that in a natural, more primitive society, the children are not raised in such heavy criticism that they are raised in a very modern technological society. But in a much more primitive society, a kid the age of 13 or 14 already knows everything that all the adults around him knows, and so there's no reason for him to continue his education. But in our Western society, they've got the idea the more education, the better. And some people just don't ever stop going to school. They just keep going to school, got a master's, got another master's, get a
Mm.
PhD, go get another master's in this, and just
Yeah.
keep on. And that happens with.
Or they get like me, who like, just like eats books and just want to, and it's just I can't stop. It's
Mhm.
compulsive. So
Exactly. So, in this primitive society that is not so critical and not so information bound, that means that the primary issues in life are the primary problems that the young men and young women who are being raised in that society, what their major problem is sensual desire and greed,
mm,
wanting things that they don't have and wanting to go get them, thinking that they're going to get some reward or benefit if they get that new axe or that new bow and arrow or whatever their society has. But their technology is not strong. Now, what has happened with us, especially at about the time of the Industrial Revolution? You see, before the Industrial Revolution, the farmers had to pay taxes, but they only paid it about once a year. That the king's men, the army, would go out and gather tax money from the people about once a year. But what has happened is that we have, because we've got clocks and we've got the mentality of time and money having value. Both time and money have value. That means that you can put a value on time. Like
yeah,
lawyers, they want $200 an hour or $350 an hour, or the girl
mm,
in the store works for $7 an hour.
yeah.
This
My,
like this.
I named my savings account time buyer. So
Exactly. Okay, so and with that criticism, that means that now our children are raised with two major issues. One is that instead of just following their dreams and following their greed, they also have jobs to do. They've got work to perform. We've got to get that education. We got to know what we're doing, etc., like that. So that now means that um, on top of, and I'm referring now to the second noble truth. The second noble truth, the cause of suffering, is greed and ill will.
mm,
And in more primitive societies like the society that the Buddha was raised in, and you can actually see that in the sutras where he's talking about the big problem with the young people in those days was greed.
mm,
The major problem with modern society is not the greed, but it's the ill will. It's
mm,
the critical thinking.
yeah,
It's the I'm better than they are, or he's fat, or I don't like that food, or this, that, and the other thing.
it's
And so we get into position of right and wrong, up and down, good
yeah,
and bad. And this is what we mean by critical thinking. The
yeah.
Buddha would call this kind of thinking unwholesome,
Yeah, exactly.
that in
You
fact it is
get to
thoughts
be
of
like
ill will.
you turn into a critic, like a professional critic of everything.
Right. And look at the fact that criticism and critics are a natural function of our society. We even in the newspapers will hire somebody to go to movies just to criticize them.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
It's really,
And
really
so
essential part. Oh, look, sorry.
and so what we have with Anapanasati now is actually two issues that we have to work with. One is to dispense with the greed that naturally comes from a primitive society, and the other is the ill will that comes with a more industrial society.
Yeah.
Okay? So, any thoughts that have to do with greed and ill will are not nurturing thoughts. They're wanting something in the sense that I will be better off if I get something, or their thoughts of I don't like this and I don't like that and things are difficult to endure. This then gives us a really strong attitude of being a loser or being a victim.
Yeah.
We're victims because we don't get what we want, and we're victims because we criticize all of this stuff, and
Yeah.
criticism, what goes around comes around.
Yeah, but
And
even
so
when we get what we want, we just go to the next thing. You know.
exactly, that we're never
Yeah.
satisfied with that greed. In
Never.
fact, after we get what we want, now we start criticizing that item. We
Yeah.
can't just love it, we've got to criticize it.
Yeah, we gotta cut it up, look at the intestines, everything, and like, yeah,
Hmm.
it's that's, yeah, it's not a good way to be happy. It's a good way to survive, maybe, but not a good way to be happy.
But that's the way our society has grown up, and that's the way that we teach our children. That a good example of this is domestic violence.
Yeah.
The people who are in a household that has domestic violence when they're a child are most likely to be the ones who are living in a household that has violence when they're an adult.
Mm.
The same thing is true with alcohol. If you have alcohol in the house and the parents are drinking alcohol on a regular basis, the child will more likely to be drinking alcohol.
Yeah.
If both of the parents go to the same church and keep going to the church and taking their kids to church when they're kids, the child is more likely to go to church when he's an adult than someone who never went to church when they were a kid.
Mm.
Okay? This is an important point to recognize that most of the real problems of life do not come with a child being born, because when the child is born, he's nurtured.
Mm.
The problems in life come when we start criticizing, which means that if in our practice we can come to a point of stop our criticism
Mm.
and start having nurturing thoughts, then our practice will have some benefit.
Yeah.
And so that benefit of make the changing this moment and a few moments and a few more moments and start to develop the habit of nurturing, we can come out of the habit of being critical.
Yeah, it feels weird in the beginning. You know,
Hmm.
these past few days, I've been really putting my focus now. Now I'm talking about focus here, but I've really been trying to collect myself to do this, and I've noticed that sometimes it feels really weird and feel really contrived, you know.
Hmm.
But at the same time, I realized that I'm doing all this negative self-talk, and that doesn't feel contrived. So it's just a matter of practice, right?
It is a matter of practice. And it also is a matter of being honest,
Yeah.
because we have, in fact, been lying to ourselves, and the society has been lying to us for so long that we don't really know the difference between lying and not lying. But when we hear something that's different from what we have come to know, then we can say that that would be lying to ourselves. An example of what I'm talking about is self-help books that have affirmations.
Okay.
So the idea is the teenage girl is in the bathroom, standing in front of the mirror, looking in the mirror and telling herself, I'm going to have a wonderful day today. I'm the boss of this place. But guess what? She doesn't really believe those things. And so after she leaves the bathroom and goes about her day, she reverts back into the old space that she was
Yeah.
because she really didn't believe those affirmations anyway. That the practice of Anapanasati is basically coming into wholesome thoughts, and most important quality of these wholesome thoughts is that they're true, they're
Mm.
real,
Mm.
they can touch us deeply because, in fact, they are not just real, but they're also profound.
Yeah.
But they also go against the grain of all that we have learned through the bringing up. So, just like I
Mm.
was talking about domestic violence, alcohol, religion, and all of that, those same children and all of the other children are taught how to be critical.
Mm.
And so we remain in a critical state of mind. So when somebody says, okay, I'm going to meditate, and they say, okay, I'm going to gladden the mind and I'm going to have thoughts like, I feel good,
Mm.
or uh, my, what a beautiful day, then the next thought they have is, I don't believe it,
Mm.
that this is contrived. Okay?
Mm.
So
I
we
think
can say the first thought that they had was a nurturing thought.
yeah.
But then the second thought they have is a critical thought. They don't believe it.
Yeah. But I
Okay,
think
so we need to keep coming back and having
yeah.
more and more nurturing
I,
thoughts.
I'm lucky in that way because I read so many books now. I started reading Thich Nhat Hanh first
Uh huh.
because it was very nurturing language. So when you read it, you feel like you're talking to an old friend. It's very
Mm-hmm.
warm, and I really needed it. I'm a very sensitive guy. I cry a lot, and I really live. Try to live, and I get really sad, and I get really happy. I say, so uh, I'm lucky in that way that I can follow my emotions that much. I have realized that I'm not as critical in my default state as many other people because of that I was born this way. So, and I
Well, we
realized,
just spent all this time talking about no, this is learned behavior. Maybe you didn't learn so much, but you weren't born with criticism. No infant is born with it. This is learned behavior.
yeah, but when I was small, when I was a child, I kind of knew some of this stuff. So when I in the kindergarten, the staff, they took me to a mirror and they said, "Who is this child?" And then, you know what I said? "This is a child," I said, and they were like, "Oh my God!" So they called my dad, who was a psychologist, and they called him and said, "He doesn't know that he has a weak sense of self. He doesn't know what it is." And I remember I'm just making fun of these people, when I was like 3 years old, 4 years old. I'm like, okay, they're reacting to me a lot here. Okay. So I can say, if I say this, maybe what will
You're
happen?
really touching on some beautiful stuff. I really appreciate that you've gone so far. That's really excellent. Here's two things about that.
Mm.
One is that every child is born not critical.
Mm.
We learn that criticism. The next point is that um, every child, let us talk about 3-year-olds, maybe 4, they're smart. Every one of us at the age of 4 is smarter than the adults around us.
Yeah.
The problem is that the big adults are big and strong and powerful and can beat the tar out of us and tell us what to do. And so the child instinctively begins to conform. He begins to go along to get along, and we become socialized.
Yeah.
And that deep wisdom that we have as really young kids, we have to kind of set that aside.
Yeah.
Well, Anapanasati then is the whole art of let's bring that back.
Yeah.
Let's get out of the critical way of doing it and come back to the more intuitive, nurturing way of doing it. The next point that you made was is that yes, young children have a very weak sense of self.
Yeah.
That sense of self actually is part of the critical mind, and it grows. And so when you come out of the critical thinking, out of the critical mind, guess what? That self and selfishness begins to deteriorate and melt away again, and we go back to a more natural state the way we were
Yeah.
when we were 3 years old.
I actually remember some amazing perceptual experience when I was in that age. You know, I think it was the first time I actually discovered that there was something more about this world. You know, so they had the news. My daycare was shutting down, and I have video of this. So we had on the news they were filming us eating. You know, and at the table in Sweden in the early 90s. You can see all the children sitting and talking to each other, but not me. I'm sitting like this, watching the lamp. Like this. I'm so mesmerized. I remember I was so mesmerized by its lights and sounds and patterns and everything. It was like moving. When I looked at stuff, it was like moving and breathing, you know. So I could, like, my imagination made things very nice.
But every child is like that also.
Yeah.
We're all alike, but many of us don't remember that kind of stuff. So I congratulate you that you can actually remember.
Yeah, but you know, I only remember it because that thing I only remember because I had it on video. So it was like my parents like, oh, you're gonna be on the news tonight. So they put the video VCR in and they recorded it. And all the children was talking, and I was just thinking like this. And then when I watched the video when I was older, I was like, why was I like that? Was there something wrong with me? You know, I thought. And then I just remembered, oh, okay, but even I used to look at the walls, you know, and just see, you know, patterns. I was, you know, mesmerized by the world.
Young children are, in fact, much more involved with their sensual input. And when I'm talking about sensual, I'm talking about the senses.
Yeah.
And so the stage that you were in was because you were gathering information. You were bringing in information like light and sounds and things like that. But what happens as we grow older is we stop taking in new input and just keep regurgitating the old stuff over and over and over again.
The world
And
seems
so
duller and boring every year, more boring every year, you know, more gray.
And so this is part of the practice then of Anapanasati is to come out of that critical mind, to come out of that critical thinking, and to come out of thinking in general and start having thoughts that have to do with what we're seeing and the other senses. This is why Anapanasati has such great value, is that it actually helps us to wake up the body. If we're beginning to really pay attention to the breathing, especially the long, deep in-breaths, then the whole body begins to change. Not only the chemistry, but the touch of the cloth. You can feel the touch of the cloth of the shirt that you're wearing. You can feel the rise and the fall of the abdomen. You can feel sometimes even the shoulders come up and down. You can feel it from the neck down into the belly. There's all kinds of things associated with the breathing that help wake up the body up. A little baby, a little child, 3-year-olds, they live in their body.
Yeah.
We all live in our body. We're having to learn to walk. We're having to do all kinds of things but after those skills are developed, then we put them a kind of away and we stop gaining in sensory input and start doing all of it with mental critical thinking.
Yeah, my daughter, it's like my daughter, you know, I was picking up her at the nursery a few days ago, and it's real snowy now in Sweden. So I took her on the you know, on the slide, and I pull her home, you know. And then I see this little child, she's 1 year old, she just started at the nursery.